Okay, so you probably searched the title of this book to find out if there were any reviews about it, and you found one.
Tim Ferriss presents Ego is the Enemy, written by Ryan Holiday, narrated by Ryan Holiday.
This is an in-depth review of Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, presented by Tim Ferriss. To cut to the chase, this review is going to point out some very specific locations in this book where it is wrong, and we're not talking about a difference of opinion wrong or thoughts on how this could have been framed differently, which I have those, certainly. But I'm just going to point out the areas in this book that are incorrect, like empirically, like verifiably false. And I'm doing that because this is a very important topic. I mean, you're looking to read a book, or maybe you've read a book and are looking to reflect on it, on a very, very important topic in any human being's life. And it may be the most important topic that any individual could ever discover about themselves and learn more about themselves. And so that's why I wanted to make this video, to say there's more to know than this book has, and here's what it is specifically, because I'm going to take you through some slides and stuff. I'm an expert in artificial emotional intelligence and emotional intelligence, how the mind works, being able to model that mind for computer systems to be able to have artificial emotions, etc. There's a lot that I know and a lot that science reveals to us, like through studies and through published works, through published papers and things like that, that can help us understand a little bit more about what we're talking about here with the ego. And why is the ego so important in a human being? Is because from a physiological perspective, from a neuroscience perspective, that entity that we call ego within the human mind is one half of every decision that we make in life, one half of every emotional reaction that we have in life. And if you take this as the end-all be-all source of your knowledge for this thing within you that affects every moment of your life, you're going to be left short. It does not deliver on a few specific things and gets a lot of things wrong because it doesn't deliver on a few specific things. And we're going to point those out as we move forward in this video, where we're going to go in depth on what this book gets wrong and what this book gets right. I do not want to cross the line into having you think that this is an attack on the character or the individuals involved connected with putting out this book, okay? Ryan Holiday, I'm a fan of Ryan Holiday for the simple fact that he has taken action to help you try to live a happier life by trying to explain something that is very important, because this topic is probably the most important topic on the planet, having to do with your personal happiness, and is probably the easiest thing to take control of if you understand how it works to the depths that you need to, because believe it or not, even though Ego is the Enemy doesn't explain this to you, your ego works with a couple of variables within you that are malleable from a waking perspective. Like, you can move these things around in your head by simply making some decisions, and then the ego has to work with those variables and give you a different output based on how you've changed those variables. And so Ego is the Enemy doesn't explain any of that. We're going to go into some of that today, and I'm going to share some slides with you with that I used with a couple of top development teams to teach them how to create artificial emotions for artificial personalities and computers, and create artificial emotional intelligence, etc., because I'm training top development teams on that stuff now, because I do have a good grasp on how the mind works, how to lay out a process on a whiteboard that explains how the mind works. And the good thing about that is that when we explain how the human mind works to individuals, you're then able to take control of your human mind a lot better and get different output from your human mind than you would normally would if you had let the process run out of control, which is just a bad thing to do in general. You don't want to let anything so complex run out of control and let it control your life without attempting to control it a little bit. And we're going to explain exactly how to do that moving forward. Now, the big problem in this book, Ego is the Enemy, comes down to the fact that it never fully defines ego specifically. And there is a specific definition of ego from a scientific standpoint and from a common sense standpoint of how to understand it, how to work with it, how to see when it's moving within you, how to adjust it, how to play with the dials that it works from in creating its influence in your life. And this book, Ego is the Enemy, misses that definition, and thus the whole book is based on an incorrect definition of ego. And specifically, I'll share with you the spots where it incorrectly defines ego. Here we go.
Whatever you're doing, your worst enemy already lives inside you, your ego. Not me, you think. No one would ever call me an egomaniac. Perhaps you've always thought of yourself as a pretty balanced person. But for people with ambitions, talents, drives, and potential to fulfill, ego comes with the territory.
Yeah, no, this first clip starts to betray the mesh between ego and egomaniac, which are two different things. An egomaniac is someone who's on the extreme end of having the ego run their life and influence all their decisions, etc., which scientifically the entire ego does. But Ryan Holiday is talking about the extremes, and all these stories in this book, all the examples in this book show the extreme examples of individuals who have let ego ruin their life or potentially ruin their life in these stories. And there is a specific definition for ego itself that is not presented here. And it tries to define ego 3 or 4 times in the book and never really does so. Here's another example of that.
Now, this is not a book about ego in the Freudian sense. Freud was fond of explaining the ego by way of analogy. Our ego was a rider on a horse with our unconscious drives representing the animal, while the ego tried to direct them. Modern psychologists, on the other hand, use the word egotist to refer to someone dangerously focused on themselves and with disregard for anyone else. All of these definitions are true enough, but of little value outside a clinical setting.
Yeah, and so anyone who references Freud in a psychological discussion nowadays is kind of lost. Freud was a father of a movement into psychology and then got a ton of stuff wrong. And his work has been pretty much abandoned over time. He's just kind of trying to beat around the bush to define it and never really does. Here's the last example of that.
The ego we see most commonly goes by a more casual definition, an unhealthy belief in our own importance, arrogance, self-centered ambition. That's the definition this book will use.
And again, that's an incorrect definition of ego. So let's go ahead and get you the correct definition of ego so that we can get you there to an understanding of what ego actually is. And again, forgive me, I'm using a slide deck that I've used before to teach folks about the mind and how it works and how emotions work and how they can be logically defined and computerized. Okay, so let's start here. We'll start with why the ego exists in the first place and what exactly it is, because that's an important thing for you to understand if you're going to glean any information about ego, about this book. Ego is your enemy or is the enemy. If you're going to glean any information out of this book at all, you need to understand the proper definition of ego. And so I'm going to give you that now. So this story starts with your brain. Your brain is, of course, your organ of survival, right? It is the thing that helps us remember where the food and water is, figure out how to build shelter, figure out how to say something funny to get somebody to jump into bed with us to procreate the species, etc. Just like the heart's responsibility is to pump blood around the body to deliver oxygen, the liver is there to help you clean the toxins out of your system, etc. The brain is your organ of survival. Okay, it's super complex, the most complex organ that we know in existence, but that's its main function, is to help us survive from one day into the next. Now, within the brain, the specific system that helps us define what things could be threats is called the limbic system. Now, the limbic system is the quickest reacting portion of our brain, and it can hijack what we're doing at any moment. It can take over the whole brain. When the limbic system is firing, it shuts down our prefrontal cortex and our thinking brain. Its job is to identify potential threats. And so when a baseball comes flying at your head, your limbic system is what's firing to make you involuntarily jump or dodge or startle reflex away from the path of the ball so that the ball doesn't hit you and kill you. That's what the limbic system does. But overall, when the limbic system scans our immediate environment for threats, a second question must be asked, which is, okay, if I have this job of defending our existence and ensuring our existence continues from one day into the next, and I have to identify threats, I got to ask a second question. A threat to what? Because we need a specific definition to understand exactly what's going on and what things could be threatened so that I know when to react and when not to react. Because if I look across the office or the yard or whatever it is and I see a leafcutter ant, I need to understand whether or not I have leaves to find out if that leafcutter ant is a threat to me. And so enters what we call our sense of self, aka the ego. And this is the very specific definition of the ego. The ego is the answer to the question, what must be protected? What is the laundry list of things that I need to protect to ensure that we survive from one day into the next? And so a sense of self is formed within the mind. And right off the bat, the body, because it's hardwired and is a portion of our human existence, our body gets placed right in the center of that definition, of that map. There's a map that Antonio Damasio, who's a famous neuroscientist, and defined self and the proto-self and cellular structures, etc. There is a map of self that gets mapped onto. Is why you know your right arm's back here behind you, waving up and down, and you can put it back there to catch a ball without looking, is because there's a map of where your body is. There's a map of the other things that are come together to become a portion of your sense of self. Now, this sense of self, this ego, is simply the laundry list of definitions that must be protected at all costs, lest we do not survive into tomorrow. That's what the ego is. There is a very specific, simple definition of what the ego is that Ego's the Enemy never delivers in this book. Now, here's the magic thing about ego, is that ego, aka sense of self, used to be thought of as our body alone. We thought threats to body self are going to be the things that evoke emotions, that are going to be evoking defensive fight or flight reactions to things, right? And then science proved that wrong. Recently, just this last decade, Jim Cohn at the University of Virginia got some people and he put them in an fMRI machine. And he put them in an fMRI machine with some glasses on with a little LED light in there. And he said this, I'm going to give you a flash of light. I'm going to watch your brain after that flash of light. And then I'm going to zap you with an electrical shock on your ankle.
Now, there are 5 of you. That means that each of you will receive just 1/5 of the total voltage of the eel.
He flashed the light. He watched the brain. And what happened in the first group is that the fear centers lit up in the individual's brain, that they were about to get zapped, negative anticipation, etc., and also centers connected with the sense of self, as had been previously identified in fMRI studies. So that was exactly what he expected to get, frankly, is I'm going to give you a flash of light, you're going to freak out, I'm going to watch it, and then I'm going to shock you. But then he did something different. He took those individuals and he said, okay, we're going to leave the glasses on you, we're going to leave you in the fMRI, we're going to take the ankle zapper off, and we're going to bring a person in that you don't know, and we're going to put them next to you. And we're going to put the ankle zapper on somebody else. So you're going to get the flash of light, we're going to watch your brain, and then we're going to zap somebody else. And they got exactly what they expected there as well, because if your body self is the only thing that ever falls into threat that could evoke emotional responses such as fear, shocking somebody else shouldn't bother you. And that's exactly what happened. He gave the flash of light to the person in the fMRI, watched their brain, shocked the stranger, and in between there was no fear. Then he did a third thing, which is what makes this world-changing science. He brought in a familiar, which is psychology's word for someone who is close to you, a significant other, a really close friend, somebody that you care about a lot, etc. And he took that person from the person who was in the fMRI, someone who knew him, gave him a flash of light, watched the brain, and then was going to shock the person that they love. And the difference between the first and the third scans were so minute, they could not tell the difference between the two. And what this proved was that other individuals in the world get mapped onto our sense of self, our ego. It becomes an attachment of the ego itself, which then must be defended at all costs. Okay, so we're going to use the same circuitry to create fear, to create happiness, to create sadness, to create anger, etc. we're just going to put different things on the map that can influence those things. So now this person becomes a portion of our sense of self so that we can have emotions about grandma getting sick. We need to have a system that can use the same basic wiring of defensive self and extend it to other people or other things that could help us survive into tomorrow. And this is exactly how that works, is that other people become mapped onto our sense of self. They become a portion of who we are, how we define ourselves. This is our ego. This thing right here, this map is our ego. I think I have a thing sitting around here. I got a diagram. And so other things can now become, or other people can now become attached to self. But where the science continues is that Tiffany Burnett White at UIUC started to show us that brands, SBC, self-brand connection, can become mapped onto our sense of self, which is why we now can become Apple versus Android people, or Ford versus Chevy people, or San Francisco 49ers versus Dallas Cowboys people, and be emotionally affected by what's going on in the world based on what we've connected with. These things become portions of our sense of self. They can become attachments of our ego, which then get run through what's called the equation of emotion, which are two specific variables that allow us, we'll get into that. Hold on. Let me not jump there yet. So anyway, now ideas can become mapped onto our sense of self. Ideas can be mapped onto our ego. And that's why we have emotional reactions about politics and things like that. In fact, Sam Harris was one of the first people to show that politics and religion also get mapped into this same neurological process within the brain that fires our defense of self mechanisms. When somebody attacks your politics, oh, Jesus, let's just look at Facebook for examples of that, right? When somebody attacks your religion, right? Let's talk about all the wars that we're fighting based on religious belief across the world, right? These things evoke emotional responses because of the same exact wiring that exists within your brain to defend your sense of self, to defend your ego. And this isn't where we stop. It's just where we start. Other ideas of your life story, of your cultural heritage, of a scarring memory, your career/job, the people around you at work, all of these things can become attached to your sense of self map, which then must be defended. That's the specific definition of ego, is this thing. It's this laundry list of identifications that you see as a portion of your existence that must be defended into tomorrow, lest we have a meltdown. Now, the way the limbic system addresses this problem of surviving into tomorrow is this equation of emotion. This is how your nervous system works. Let's jump back a few slides. Your nervous system is a big comparator, okay? The basic operation of your entire mind, including all of its thoughts, emotions, and challenges, is derived from a basic operation of your nervous system. Now, your nervous system simply compares one thing to another. That's all your nervous system ever actually does. It just looks at one thing and then looks at another thing, and then it says, okay, what's the difference between these two? And that's all the nervous system can ever do. It's a very simple logic system that's physiologically based. So when you put your hand on the stove, it's never telling you, oh, this is 190 degrees and it's going to be damaging to the hand. We need to remove this hand from the heat so that we can survive into tomorrow if we need this hand to pick food or to defend ourselves, etc., right? It says, this is much hotter than it was a second ago. That's what the nervous system does 100% of the time. It always tells you the difference between two things. Now, this is why you need to remove yourself from the house if you smell gas, because what happens is your nervous system will normalize. And it'll only tell you the differences in a certain time window. So when you wake up in the middle of the night and you smell the gas and the gas is filling the house and you're like, oh shit, and you get up and you start looking for it, and then all of a sudden after 10 minutes you don't smell it anymore and you think it was a dream, you go back to bed and it kills the whole family. Well, that's because between time 0 and time 1, it reported the difference between the gas levels. The gas was nothing, and then the gas leak started, and then the gas was high. So then your nervous system said, okay, wake up, dummy, get out of the house because you're about to die. But then what happens, time 1 becomes time 0, or time 1 moves over here, and time 1 to time 2, gas high to gas high, all of a sudden you don't smell it anymore. This is why people get used to their BO, right? Their body odor, because they hang out for 10 minutes and then all of a sudden their nose says, you don't have any BO. Or your BO is no worse than it was 10 minutes ago. Well, the same thing happens with our nervous system. It normalizes after a while. And this is why hedonic adaptation occurs, with happiness of getting new money, and then all of a sudden a year later you're back at the same baseline of happiness that you exist at originally, is because your nervous system will normalize to a new normal, and then you have to change things again to create some kind of a noticeable difference. Well, that is what's going on in your nervous system when your mind is creating emotional reactions, egoic reactions, etc. It's comparing two things. What are those two things? The two things it's comparing is your equation of emotion variables. The first being your expectation or preference about any certain something, and the second being your perception about that same something. It goes into an equation that looks like this. Your expectation and a preference as compared to perception will then create an emotional reaction. And in general, this is how it works. When your expectation and preference is balanced with your perception, you will have a positive emotional reaction. When it is imbalanced, when they are different, when your expectation or preference is different than your perception of what's going on at the moment, then you will have a negative reaction. And the ego plays into this in the following way. Your ego, aka your sense of self, has all of these attachments to it. The expectation or preference in your equation of emotion is set by your self map, your ego map. Your mind's sense of self has something that is derivative of homeostasis, is where it comes from. That homeostasis governs every cell in your body, by the way. And it says everything in the cell must be held at status quo or increased in value, or we're going to have a problem. We need to take action. If everything's got to be cool, we're cool. If everything's not cool, then we got a problem, right? And so from there, that's how the ego sets its expectation or preference. Automatically, it says everything on the self map, everything on the ego map, everything on the mind sense of self has to maintain status quo value or increase in value, or we're going to have a problem. We need to take action if it's going south, if there's a threat to something, if there's a valuation decrease to something, that's when we have to take action. That's when our strongest emotions come out as an individual. And this is something that's not set consciously, by the way, because you say, well, expectation or preference sounds like something I would choose, but it's not. It's set by homeostasis as a very simple control mechanism to say everything's got to be okay with mom, or increase in value with mom, or we're going to have a problem. Or everything's got to be okay with my job and be status quo, or increase in value, or we're going to have a problem. And this is how a very simple nervous system that only compares two things at a time can then be used to run our complex life and to give us a complex understanding of what's going on in our life with all of these additional things piled onto our self map, which all then get an expectation or preference, and then get compared to the second step or the second variable within our equation of emotion, which is our perception. And so what happens is all the things on our self map must be held at status quo or increase in value. And then we have these perceptions coming through of absolutely everything in the world. Okay. We have perceptions that can come from our own thoughts and create an emotional reaction or internal reaction connected with those. We have headlines on Facebook or in the newspaper or news that we see on TV or whatever. We have conversations with other people that can trigger emotional responses or visceral responses within us connected with how we are perceiving that piece of information coming through and how it compares to the other side of the equation, which is our equation of emotion, the things that are connected with our self map, our ego. And so when the perception comes in and says that's an attack on something over here, we have a negative reaction. When something comes in that confirms or affirms something on our self map, then we have a positive reaction associated with that. And this is true of absolutely everything. When you're out camping and you prefer that a bear not come into your tent and a bear is coming into your tent, then you have a negative emotional reaction connected with that because it could be a threat to self. When you have a positive connection to a sports team and all of a sudden they win the game, then that balances your equation of emotion. You have a positive emotion as a result. Other examples, when you go out to buy your brand new tech gadget and it's awesome, you love it. And when you go out to buy your tech gadget and it sucks or it's broken out of the box, etc., you got to take it back to the store, then you're upset, then you're angry, then you have something to deal with. Same's true for any relationship with any human being on any level, professional or personal. When that's going great, you have positive emotions associated with it. When it's not going so great, you have negative emotions associated with it. And the same is true for a negative proof. When you take out the expectation or preference about something, that means you don't really care about it, right? You haven't attached it to your self map. It's not part of your personal existence. So you could tell me who won the lacrosse Canadian championship in Canada, whatever. I don't give a shit. I don't care about lacrosse. I don't know any of the players on the team. I have no connection to Canada. I don't really care. So you can tell me who won the game. I can learn about it on the top bar there, find out who won, and have no emotional reaction associated with it because I don't have any connection onto my self map at all. This is what causes the apathy. Similarly, I can love a team. Let's say I love the Chicago Cubs. I'm wearing a Cubs hat right now. I love the Chicago Cubs. If I don't know who won the game, I cannot have an emotional reaction about that game, right? I certainly can have an emotional reaction that maybe I want to know the score of the game and I don't know the score of the game, but that's a different equation of emotion in that my expectation or preference is to know the score of the game, and then I don't know the score of the game, and that can be frustrating. But regarding I want the team to win, and I don't know who won, I will not have an emotional reaction associated with the connection to the game itself. Now, is it just this simple? Is our entire emotional landscape just this simple? Yes and no. Yes, you will never be able to break this equation of emotion. You'll never be able to break this definition of egos, aka sense of self. That's empirically proven science that we have that's becoming accepted science. There is a more complex system that can explain every bit of your mind's processing from soup to nuts. So much so that we can even talk about understanding empathy from a complex systems perspective and compassion. There are specific definitions of those two things as well. If you'd like to understand that stuff better, you can pick up a book called Mind Hacking Happiness that I wrote that explains the operation of the mind, soup to nuts, and explains the definition and the process that the ego follows to create all of your positive and negative emotions. Now, here's the magic behind that and why you needed to understand all the stuff that we discussed in the slides earlier. Just by you understanding that there are two variables that your mind uses to create all of your emotional reactions in life, and all of your thoughts and all of your decisions are influenced by this process. The reason it's important for you to know that is once you can see those variables at play in your mind, that enables some very hardwired functions to come forth that are positive for you. First of all, when you have a negative emotional reaction about something, when you take your attention and you put it on the two variables that have created your negative emotional reaction, all of a sudden a thick black curtain comes down between you and the negative emotional reaction that could be controlling you at the moment, but isn't anymore because you understand exactly why this has come to be. Now, there is another set of studies called the Name It, Tame It studies, which help us to identify that when we understand an emotional reaction within ourselves, it automatically starts to turn it off. Now, the reason that occurs is because it's a survival mechanism. When we walk by a coil on the ground and we think it's a snake, that's our limbic system saying, oh my God, a snake. And you jump a little bit because you think it's a snake. And then you look down and you see it's a hose. Now your thinking brain is in the loop. And your thinking brain is understanding, oh, I understand you were afraid, or we were afraid because you thought this was a snake on the ground, but it's just a hose. Well, there's a function of the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex and the medial prefrontal cortex that then sends a signal back to your limbic system, to your emotional brain, to say, hey, shut off the emotion. We don't need it anymore because we understand what's going on. Your initial assumption that this was a snake was incorrect. It's a hose. We don't need the fear. Don't waste the energy. Don't dump the adrenaline because we have finite amounts of those. So then what does the limbic system do? It listens. It shuts off because it's designed to help us survive from one day into the next. And wasting energy would be a bad thing. So when this thinking brain up here sends the signal back to the emotional brain, it physiologically shuts your negative stuff off. You cannot stop it from happening. It's like a sneeze. Once it starts, it's going. Period. And what happens there is that your brain understands the emotion and sends the signal back, and then the limbic system listens and says, okay, we're done. I'm not going to send you any more information about this. And this is what's called resolving an emotion. Like you could do this for years and years and years and talk to a psychologist about the stuff that's happened in your childhood at the point that a few little buttons are pressed in your brain those things finally resolve, and all of a sudden you're a happy person because you've resolved the issues that you had from childhood with this psychology of figuring out and understanding why you were feeling that way, etc. This is the same thing at work. You can do this in 2 seconds. You don't need 20 years of psychological therapy to get through some of these things. You can literally touch a button and it resolves it, period, by understanding the components that came together to create your bullshit in the first place. Okay. So that's what happens in your brain when you simply look at the two variables. You understand why that fear is occurring, why that anger is occurring, why that sadness is occurring. You look at the two things that have created it in the first place. That presses that magic button in your right ventrolateral and your medial prefrontal cortex to say, shut off this negative stuff. And it does, and it never comes back. It's not like you're repressing it to where you're going to have to deal with it later. You're actually resolving the issue by understanding how it came to be and putting a different perspective on the emotional reactions coming from your limbic system. It's awesome. That's what this book should have told you. This ego is the enemy, but it didn't, which is why if you want to understand the ego to the highest level possible, to the high, I mean, neuroscientists, psychologists, multiple United States Navy SEALs have now said this is the best book on the human mind currently in print. Pick this up because this will explain. If you're geeking out on ego and you want to understand your ego, this is the book that you need to complete what Ego is the Enemy does not deliver for you. Although, read Ego is the Enemy. Read it. It's got some good stories. It's got some good examples. It's got some good personal tales from the author's life. I like Ryan Holiday that he's stepping up and trying to create this opportunity for you to learn and to understand and to dive into this extremely important topic that will change your life if you get into it and mess with things within your own mind. Just pick this one up too, because both of those are going to give you a much better picture than you had if you would read just Ego is the Enemy. Because the more you understand about how this stuff works, the more you're going to understand about how you work as an individual. So let's get to some examples within the book that we need to discuss and the areas that I'd like you to focus on and the areas that I think you may need to skip.
We are, as the poet Lucretius put it a few thousand years ago, the proverbial sick man ignorant of the cause of his malady.
And isn't that true? We are the sick man ignorant of the cause of our maladies if we don't understand exactly how the ego works or how the sense of self works within our mind to create all of the negativity that we experience in our life. Because if you think about it, our mind is the thing that creates 100% of the negative shit we have to deal with. It's the last step. The last step between somebody pissing you off and you being pissed off about it is your mind acknowledging that you're going to be pissed. The last thing between somebody saying something sad to you and you being sad about it is your mind agreeing to that sadness. The last thing that happens between somebody trying to scare you or something happening that scares you and you being scared about it is your mind agreeing that it's going to create the fear. And you can step in and throw a wrench in that works and throw a wrench in that process if you know what the hell you're doing. And this is mastery level stuff. This is mind mastery level understanding. Because when you can do that, you're literally in control of your mind. You're no longer in control, or you're no longer being controlled by your mind, which 99.99% of the earth is controlled by their mind, running around out of control. Next, let's jump to a section that I have a small issue with that I'd like to share.
Yet far too many of us never reach our intended destination. Ego, more often than not, is the culprit. We build ourselves up with fantastical stories. We pretend we have it all figured out. We let our star burn bright and hot only to fizzle out, and we have no idea why. These are the symptoms of ego, for which humility and reality are the cure. To whatever you aspire, ego is your enemy.
Okay, I have an issue with saying ego is your enemy, and this is more of a subtle difference between our approaches because there are all kinds of arguments to be made that ego causes negativity in your existence, and it does. But it can't be seen as your enemy any more than your heart or your spleen or any other vital portion of your existence can be seen as your enemy. From a neuroscience perspective, from a psychological sciences perspective, your ego is the answer to the question, what must be protected? And so for me to be able to step up and, let's say, go put you on the ground after you slap my son, I need to have that physiological response of my son being attached to my self map and that anger arising within me, which I then have the wherewithal to decide. right? It's no more compulsion. It's no longer compulsion of something that's controlling me, but I can decide to use the emotional energies that arise within my body to take action to protect innocent people or the people around me, or to do things that are beneficial for my life and my family, etc. I have to acknowledge that as a good process. And so ego, in its proper definition, is not really your enemy. It can do a lot of negative stuff if you let it run the show, but it's not really your enemy. It's more like a toddler. It's more like, it's fun to see it play. It's reactionary. It's sometimes unreasonable. And you definitely don't want to let it steer the ship. You don't want it running the show. So you've got to step up and be the parent or be the authority in your own mind to say, ego is no longer going to run my existence. You need to understand what it is. It's not your enemy. You can certainly screw things up if you let it run rampant, but it's not necessarily an enemy. Just a minor point that I wanted to bring up that's more semantics than anything else, but important to point out, because if you don't have a complete understanding of ego, it would be easy to say, yeah, it's your enemy and you need to fight against it and whatnot. It's not that you have to fight against your ego. You simply need to adjust the variables that your ego uses to create its reaction. And at the point that you can change those variables that it uses to create its reactions, all of a sudden you're controlling your ego without having to struggle with it, because you've changed the things that it's working with from a base understanding of its own existence. That's the difference between thinking about and not completely understanding ego and understanding it to the depths that it operates within your mind. Now, it's because of this misunderstanding of the complete definition or the proper definition of ego that some quotes are misplaced. Here we go.
Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. Lao Tzu.
Okay, so this Lao Tzu quote, when we're talking about topics of ego and overcoming ego, now we're dancing into the realm of understanding enlightenment and a larger awakening to the things that occur within your mind when you can set aside your ego circuitry and your ego processing. There are a number of things that will physiologically change in your brain, and your brain will operate differently. Your mind will operate differently once you're able to overcome your egoic urges and your egoic processing. Now, Lao Tzu is a person who overcame ego deeply by becoming enlightened and then taught about enlightenment. And so the problem that I have with this use of this quote is that it doesn't go deep enough in revealing the truth. Lao Tzu was talking about understanding the thing that is beyond ego, the thing that your brain and mind do when you're able to shut off the processing of the ego. And it takes a lot of practice. It takes a very deep dedication and a little luck to be able to do that. But once you do that, you open up doors within your mind and open up capabilities within your mind that you never even knew were there. It's like you open a closet door that you think was a broom closet, and all of a sudden infinity's on the other side, and all knowledge and wisdom in the universe is there for your taking, and you didn't realize it was there. And what Lao Tzu is specifically talking about here is that those who try to put words to that experience of discovering that place within you that is infinite, that has the knowledge and wisdom, and then sidesteps all of the mental processing that would cause pain and suffering in your life, to speak about that is simply impossible. And so people who speak about it do not know, and people who do not know speak about it because they try to put words or try to put understanding to something that is ineffable, that is even on the list of definitions that William James put together on religious experience or spiritual experience, etc., which is what we call things that are seemingly beyond mind, right? Seemingly beyond self is the spiritual thing. We're going to be putting out a scientific definition of spirituality pretty soon, which is kind of cool. That's what he's talking about there. And it's kind of a misuse of the quote, just in my opinion, to put it here in the middle of this fumbling towards mediocrity of this book on ego. And I know that's harsh, and I don't mean to be that harsh, but when you misdefine the topic for which you're writing a book about, I got to call you out about that. And it spills over. And here's an example of where it spills over in this next clip about a misunderstanding about the basic definition of ego, bringing about further misunderstandings of how it works.
Find your passion, live passionately, inspire the world with your passion. People go to Burning Man to find passion, to be around passion, to rekindle their passion. Same goes for TED and the now enormous South by Southwest and 1,000 other events, retreats, and summits, all fueled by what they claim to be life's most important force. Here's what those same people haven't told you. Your passion may be the very thing holding you back from power or influence or accomplishments, because just as often we fail with, no, because of passion.
Okay, now passion is connected with your subconscious levels of awareness. Passion comes out when, we're in the bedroom and letting our bodies do the things that our bodies like to do. Or passion is that thing where your subconscious awareness says, oh, I really like this thing, or I really dig this thing for some reason, and I want to do this thing. Now, the irony of Ryan Holiday poo-pooing passion is that the passion is what is closer to our heart. The passion is the thing that drives us from a subconscious level. And people love it when we connect with subconsciousness. We love it on TV. We love when the major athlete, Michael Jordan, is up there just doing his thing and his muscle memory and is just wiping all over the opponents with his greatness, which he's not thinking about. He's let his subconscious awareness and his muscle memory and his instinctive reactions take over his body to get the ball into the basket. We love to see that on an emotional outburst. We love the viral videos that are so emotional. Well, that's a passion. That is a subconscious awareness that is coming out that we automatically want to connect with as human beings, because that is the more authentic human being. And so when Ryan Holiday says, passion could be a problem for you, okay, it could be a problem for you. If it drives your actions beyond logical, reasonable activity, you do need to govern your passions when you're making decisions about a monetary economy. But at the same time, your passions are what drive you. Your passions are the real you underneath the thinking you, underneath the mind you that exists at your top level waking awareness. And so people love to connect with passion. So certainly don't discount your passion. And I have a disagreement about this whole chapter of passion in this book. So just take that as a grain of salt if and when you read it.
The farther you travel down that path of accomplishment, whatever it may be, the more often you meet other successful people who make you feel insignificant. It doesn't matter how well you're doing, your ego and their accomplishments make you feel like nothing, just as others make them feel the same way. It's a cycle that goes on ad infinitum, while our brief time on Earth, or the small window of opportunity we have here, does not.
Yeah, now this occurs specifically because of the relative valuation of self as compared to someone else's self. And this is the basis for jealousy. This is the basis for envy. This is the basis for a lot of things that can arise within the human mind connected with comparing what you have to comparing to what someone else has. And those fit well within the model of the valuation of self or evaluation of a specific attachment of self or ego as compared to a specific attachment of someone else. Like your car, you love your car, except when you see this guy's car, this person's car, and all of a sudden this is better, you like it better, and all of a sudden your car's a piece of shit because you saw your neighbor get a brand new car. This is the whole keeping up with the Joneses thing that occurs within the human mindset. There's, it's completely, you can design it on a whiteboard. You can put diagrams up and show the math, et cetera, of exactly how this works, exactly why this works. But most critically, this is important because when you learn to look at it, when you learn to look at the process of you actually doing that comparison between what you have and what they have, or what you have and what you wish you would have had, or the outcome here versus the outcome there, then that allows you that vision to say, okay, I'm going to pull my awareness back from this process. I'm not going to be affected by it as much. And now I can make a decision that is not based on its influence. And that's super important to be able to understand. And so understanding the depths of the definition of the human ego and exactly what it is in your mind is super important here. And ego's the enemy has kind of missed the bus on that.
But while other generals regularly lobbied for promotions, General MacArthur, for example, advanced over other officers in the pre-war years largely due to the aggressive efforts of his mother. Marshall actively discouraged it. When others began to push for Marshall to be chief of staff, he asked them to stop, because it makes me conspicuous in the Army. Too conspicuous, in fact, he said. Later, he discouraged an effort by the House to pass a bill awarding him the rank of Field Marshal, not only because he thought the name Field Marshal Marshall would sound ridiculous, but because he didn't want to outrank or hurt his mentor, General Pershing, who was near death and a constant source of advice and guidance. Can you imagine? In all these cases, his sense of honor meant turning down honors, and often letting them go to other people. Like any normal human being, he wanted them, only the right way. More important, he knew that, however nice they would have been to have, he could do without them, while perhaps others could not. Ego needs honors in order to be validated. Confidence, on the other hand, is able to wait and focus on the task at hand, regardless of external recognition.
There's absolutely no difference between Marshall was as a human being or could have been as a human being, except for the fact that he simply attached himself to different attachments on his ego map, on his self map. He didn't think that awards and other things were the important portion of life. He thought the mission for which he signed up was important, and that's the thing that he attached to his self map. And so when opportunities for self-aggrandizement or self-recognition came up, he said that is not the mission of the Army to push forward the individual. The mission of the Army is to attain its goals. That's what he's attached to, and that's what he's defending. It's absolutely no different in General Marshall from one perspective to the other, from one needing the awards to shunning the awards. It's the same exact process. It's just that he's attached to different things. He's not attached to the individual accolades that can come from awards, but he is in full defense of his attachment to the ideas of how the Army should be run and what individuals shouldn't necessarily need. I mean, I work with SEALs, right? We do this podcast, Two SEALs and a Walrus. These guys, a lot of the times the attitude is, hey, you did it perfect. Great job for doing your fucking job. Go back to work. You don't get any accolades, right? It's just the way it is. It's what you attach to. It's what makes the important list on your self map, your ego map. There is no difference. There is no better or worse in the General Marshall situation. It is simply what he was attached to, which made the difference. Let's go to the next clip.
Writer Cheryl Strayed once told a young reader, "You're becoming who you're going to be, and so you might as well not be an asshole." This is one of the most dangerous ironies of success. It can make us someone we never wanted to be in the first place. The disease of me can corrupt the most innocent climb.
Now, there may be a little bit of nittiness in this comment, but the thing that I wanted to point out was the use of the word climb, which kind of betrays the author's misunderstanding of there being a better or worse, of a climb within society, a climb within business, a climb within whatever. The whole idea of climbing somewhere to get an advantage or an attainment or something is egoic in nature. And so we have a book about ego talking about the climb, the improvement, the stuff that will ultimately get attached to the ego map and need to be defended. And your search for happiness is connected with the things that you could put on your ego map, or the feathers you can put in your cap, which get onto your ego map. I just thought it was interesting that in a book on ego, we're pointing out we're trying to manage ego and then use ego to climb. It's like we're not understanding that we can use the 800-pound gorilla to wrestle the 800-pound gorilla from a certain extent. So I just thought it was interesting and wanted to point it out. Next clip.
As his wife later observed, the people who saw George Marshall as simply modest or quiet missed what was special about the man. He had the same traits that everyone has: ego, self-interest, pride, dignity, ambition. But they were tempered by a sense of humility and selflessness, she said.
There is, when you're dealing with the ego, there is no good or bad line of demarcation where, oh, this is acceptable and the amount of negativity that it's going to bring to your life, and then this is unacceptable because it's just over the top, and we need to stay in this range. That's the wrong message to be delivering when you're discussing a book about ego and its negative effects on humanity. You need to be able to take the extra step to say there is an existence beyond the whole process of ego that you can step into if you overcome this mindful process within your brain's physiology and you understand it for what it is, a defensive self mechanism based on a false definition of self. The ego has no basis in reality. It's a function of your nervous system designed to defend self so that you can survive from one day into tomorrow, but it's not reality. It's not reality in the least bit. And it causes a lot of negativity in your life when you start to run your life based on its egoic reactions. And so to be able to say that there's a good landing spot where you can keep ego and let it run your life just a little bit, and then over here is horrible, that's the wrong message to be delivering in a book about ego. What you need to be delivering is the message that says, this is a process. There are variables connected with this process. You can control and adjust those variables, thereby adjusting the process, thereby being able to step away from the process itself and not have it run your life. That's where you need to be as an author of a book on ego, because if you misdefine ego from the beginning, your whole book is shit. And the lessons that you teach aren't as deep as they could be based on what ego is, what ego really does, how it really works, etc. And again, I'm not attacking the individual. I'm just attacking the work. I cannot wait, actually, to find out what Ryan Holiday does after he gets that depth of understanding on this book, which I think he will probably reapproach in his future life after a lot of the stuff comes out into the spotlight. And I think Tim Ferriss probably also felt the same way, because he had an interview or a conversation on the end of this book, because I think he might have subconsciously felt that it didn't really completely hit the mark, although he loves it, and he should love it because it's the most important topic on the planet. But I think there was some kind of unease there because they had to add a conversation at the end of the book to discuss more in depth the practical application and etc. Next clip.
It's hard to be humble when you're as great as I am, Muhammad Ali once said. Yeah, okay. That's why great people have to work even harder to fight against this headwind. It's hard to be self-absorbed and convinced of your own greatness inside the solitude and quiet of a sensory deprivation tank. It's hard to be anything but humble, walking alone on a beach late at night with an endless black ocean crashing loudly against the ground next to you. We have to actively seek out this cosmic sympathy. There's the famous Blake poem that opens with, "To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour." That's what we're after here. That's the transcendental experience that makes our petty ego impossible.
Yeah, and Ryan Holiday is dancing with what happens after you get beyond ego, and there's a mind expansion, a consciousness expansion experience that happens that's based on a physiology that when your brain patterns change, like you have brain patterns that are caused by your default mode network, and those inhibit other brain patterns to be able to arise. Well, once you're able to quell those default mode network patterns and to turn down your egoic circuits, so to speak, then other things, other patterns can arise within your brain, rise within your mind. And this is what's connected with sometimes what happens with psychedelics, but it also can happen without any external chemical compounds entering your body at all. It's simply a physiological change within your body to allow different patterns to arise and allow different areas of your brain to be turned on and different areas of your consciousness to then be accessed. And so what Blake is talking about there in his poem is the actual experience of what you go through when that portion of your brain opens up, when that portion of your mind opens up that is beyond ego, to see heaven in a grain of sand, or infinity in an hour, that type of thing. It's a perceptual, experiential thing. Now, the important thing about that experience of being beyond ego is that it rewrites your ego itself. It rewrites your sense of self, because you are what you experience in life, and your definition of self is taken from the things that you experience. And in fact, experience is the only thing that can rewrite your sense of self, that can rewrite your ego. And so these experiences that you have, and this is why I believe that psychedelics are very important in a person's spiritual growth or personal growth, is that when you're forced to have a consciousness expansion experience or a mind expansion experience, that experience itself rewrites your ego. Now, the important portion of your understanding there is that, remember, ego sets one half of your equation of emotion. It sets your expectation or preference about everything that you perceive in life as it's coming in, and then gets weighed, and then you have an emotional reaction about it, or intellectual reaction or visceral reaction, etc. That whole one half of the equation of emotion is set by your sense of self. It's set by your ego. And so when your ego changes, that changes your entire emotional landscape for the rest of your life. So it's important for you to understand that. And it's important for you to understand that there's a difference between just dealing with ego and getting beyond ego to the point that different patterns arise within your brain, within your mind, and then that changes the entire sense of self. It's like an emergent property. An emergent property in math is one that comes from a complex system. It's a property that comes from the complexity of the system underneath, and then that emergent property downregulates back into the system that created it in the first place. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. Again, if you want to understand more about this stuff, pick up this book, Mind Hacking Happiness. It's not a super hard read. It's actually easy enough to understand for fifth graders to understand. And once you understand it, you take control of your mind and your life like you never have before. Next clip.
The great philosopher king Marcus Aurelius knew this very well. Called to politics almost against his will, he served the Roman people in continually higher offices from his teens until his death. There was almost always pressing business, appeals to hear, wars to fight, laws to pass, favors to grant. He strove to escape what he called imperialization, the stain of absolute power that had wrecked previous emperors. To do that, he wrote to himself, he must fight to be the person philosophy tried to make you. This is why one Zen philosopher is supposed to have called out to himself every day, "Master? Yes, sir." Then he would add, "Become sober." "Yes, sir." He would conclude by saying, "Do not be deceived by others." "Yes, sir. Yes, sir."
Yeah, and this is not super accurate. The two analogies are slightly different, because Marcus Aurelius was trying to manage his ego and not allow attachments of mind to taint his. I mean, he had a great understanding of how the human mind works, and he's an amazing writer and shows a great in-depth understanding of ego and how the human mind works. And he's trying to manage how much attachment that he gets onto his mind that then affects all of his existence. The Zygan quote is completely misused here, though, because Zygan is talking about something totally different. He's talking about the beyond ego existence of talking to himself to say, "Master, don't let other people fool you." And by that, he's saying, don't let other people's understandings of their sense of self and what sense of self is allow you to even put that thing on. Totally deny it. And that's a step above what we're talking about with Marcus Aurelius in this particular instance. So again, is not talking about ego at all. He's talking about sidestepping it, not putting it on, not acknowledging it, because it is ultimately an illusion. It's a concept. It's a invention of your mindful existence. So again, is talking about don't put it on, don't be fooled. And it's beyond what Marcus Aurelius and other Stoics have typically talked about in the past. He's talking about enlightenment. He's talking about staying in the space of not having mental attachments, not having worldly attachments within the mind at all, so that emotional turmoil doesn't arise. There's a huge difference. Huge difference. Next quote.
He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a living man, Seneca once said. Alter that. He who will do anything to avoid failure will almost certainly do something worthy of failure.
Yeah, and so this one's kind of just a pet peeve for me. And I'm not saying this just to Ryan Holiday. I'm saying this to anybody who would like to change Seneca's words. Leave Seneca the fuck alone. And especially if you don't understand the deepest meaning of his sentiments. What Seneca says is accurate without any alteration. Because the entire identification of the body as self and the rejection of fear as the ending of that bodily existence is the ultimate example of how much you should discount and ignore your egoic identification. Okay, so Seneca's talking about fear of death. Well, fear of death is simply the ultimate example of fear of anything. If you have an attachment to self that you're going to be afraid of failing, you don't want to be a failure, so you're not even going to try, right? That's what Seneca's talking about ultimately to say, but he says it, without any minutia. If you're afraid of death, you're never going to do anything good. Meaning if you're afraid of anything less than death, you're not going to do anything good because you're not going to try. You're going to be afraid to take action. And so you don't really need to alter Seneca's statements to understand his position here. Your entire egoic existence is defined by your mind, including your body, ultimately, because it's the one that's hardwired in there that you dodge when a baseball's coming at your head involuntarily. So if you're afraid of death, you're never going to get anything done, is what he's saying. And inclusive of all the other things that become attachments of mind. That's exactly what Seneca was talking about. He's an enlightened individual, a very prolific Stoic. You don't need to change his words. Just my opinion. Next.
If you're listening to this right now, then you have made it through this book. I was afraid some people might not. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't sure I'd ever get here myself. In any case, just by making it to this point, you've struck a serious blow against it. It's not all you need to do, but it is a start.
Yeah. And I would agree. I mean, if this book had delivered the proper definition of ego to the level of understanding that you need to have, yeah, because of the things of being able to look at ego from the variables that it uses to create its reactions within you, I would agree. Because that turns on a physiological process within your brain that literally shuts off your negativity from its source. It turns it off at the spigot through a hardwired function of your brain. Your right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, your medial prefrontal cortex send a signal back, says shut it off. Also, the perspective change of you looking at a process of emotion shifts your perspective within the mind rather than taking you into something of being part of that anger, being a part of that sadness, being part of that fear, having it be who and what you are at the moment. Now, all of a sudden, you get a line of demarcation that puts a thick black curtain between you and the emotional reaction that's occurring. And then there are some amazing things that occur because of those functions within your mind, just like a tooth can't bite itself or a fingertip can't touch itself, a taste bud can't taste itself, an olfactory nerve can't smell itself. There needs to be a separation, a space between a perceiver and a perceived. And at the point you can start to take your mind and perceive the reactions of your mind, all of a sudden your sense of self has to rewrite. Your ego has to rewrite and says, well, I thought I was this mess. I thought I was the crap that was going on in my mind, but now the crap in the consciousness that can see that crap. That's a profound experience that occurs within a human being to then rewrite the sense of self, to rewrite the ego en masse, to say, I thought I was just the mess of the mind, but now I'm just the mess of the mind and the perception that can see it. Wait a second. That's a huge shift in an individual, because that shift then feeds into your equation of emotion for the rest of your life. You all of a sudden you become bigger than your problems. You become bigger than the issues that have been causing you, vexing you, creating situations for you, problematic situations for your entire life. That's a huge thing. And if this book, Ego's the Enemy, could have delivered on that by giving you the exact understanding of what the ego is, how it works, the process that it follows, and the variables in which you can adjust to change its output, then you would have struck in a blow. because then you're allowing the hardwired functionality of the brain to manage your ego for you, to turn down your negative reactions for you from a physiological perspective. It would have been amazing, but ego is the enemy does not do that. Here are the notes that I wrote about this last quote. You've not struck any blow against your ego if you have not learned the two variables that your ego uses to create all of its negative reactions. You have not struck any blow against your ego if you don't know how to adjust those two variables to reduce your ego's reactivity. You've not struck a blow against your ego by not understanding the proper definition and construction of what your ego is within you. You have not struck a blow to your ego if you have not learned the simple trick of moving your awareness away from ego into the scientifically identified space of meta-awareness. That's a real thing. I talk about it in Mind Hacking Happiness, which helps you shut down, from a physiological perspective, the ego circuits in the brain. You have not learned to strike a blow against the ego unless you have learned the simple trick that allows your right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex and your medial prefrontal cortex to literally physiologically turn down the reactivity of the limbic system, and particularly the amygdala within the limbic system, which is the primary culprit of any ego's negative reaction. It's not that this book isn't accurate in certain places, because it is accurate in certain places. Let's go back and let's point out some of the awesome parts of this book. Chapter 3. Chapter 3 was about becoming a student. Amazing portion of the book. Amazing portion of the book. Talking about the story of the Metallica guitarist or bassist. The first really usable knowledge in the book is in chapter 3. It's awesome. It's a great story. Work is a decent chapter. Always stay a student into part 2 is a great lesson and a great set of ideas that you need to familiarize yourself with. Don't tell yourself a story is an amazing part of the book. It's a good part that if you augment your understanding of ego with exactly what it is and how it works, you'll get some benefit of Ryan Holiday's words. So don't think that this is a complete poo-poo of this book or a hit piece or whatever, just to try to sell my own stuff. I want you to know. Go steal this. Go fucking steal it somewhere. I want you to have the information. I don't. This isn't like a marketing thing. I want you to understand it, because if you understand it to the level that you can understand it, it will change your life.
You know what? In fact, you don't even have to spend a dime. You can go to Mind Hacking Happiness right now, and you can sign up for a free 45-day mind mastery course. It covers a lot of this stuff. It was $1,000. I reduced it to $0 in this COVID craziness. So there you go. This is not a money play. This is not a sell more books for me play.
And Ryan Holiday is a great person, I'm sure. I haven't met him, but I really admire him for taking the step of wanting to get you the information that can help you manage this potentially horribly influential and negatively influential force in your life. I love him for that. I love Tim Ferriss for stepping up and saying, let me help you with this. Awesome. But just, take the book with a grain of salt. At the end of epilogue at 10:33, Holiday says something about the reader having seen as much as anyone can be shown about the problems of ego. Bullshit. I will just come out and say that statement is wrong. And, it's just a big nope. Multiple scientists, neuroscientists, psychologists, and now many numerous Navy SEALs says MHH is probably a good source to give you the best and most comprehensive knowledge on the human ego and how it works and how to get over it. Now, the important thing I wanted to share with you. Please be sure to check out the Two Seals and a Walrus podcast, where a couple of the aforementioned Navy SEALs and I have discussions about how to hack your mind. We talk about psychedelics. We have some amazing interviews with cutting-edge science minds. It's a fun little romp. You might want to check it out. I don't know if they'll ever see this, by the way, but Ryan Holiday, Tim Ferriss, I love you guys, and thank you for your efforts to help people live happier lives. We need more people like you who try and who get up and move forward even after making mistakes. We all make mistakes. And I hope we can fix some of mine someday with your help. Lord, wouldn't that be amazing? I love you guys. Talk to you soon. Peace.